The town of San Miguel sat quietly between low green hills and dusty farm roads. It was not a place where the world's great stories began. Nothing historic had happened there for generations. Life moved slowly in San Miguel. Every morning the church bell rang at 6. Bakery ovens warmed the narrow streets with the smell of fresh bread. Farmers drove old trucks toward the fields. Children walked to school with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. And above the town, standing on the hill like it had for centuries, was the small hospital of Santa Esperanza. It was not a large hospital. Just 3 floors, a small emergency ward, and a quiet chapel near the entrance. Most nights were uneventful. But on a cool spring morning in 2026, something unusual happened. Clara Ruiz had just finished another long night shift. She had been a nurse at Santa Esperanza Hospital for 5 years. Long enough to understand the rhythm of the building. The slow beeping of monitors. The quiet footsteps in empty hallways. The tired silence of patients who could not sleep. By 5 in the morning, the hospital usually became very still. Doctors finished their rounds. Nurses updated charts. And the first pale light of dawn began to creep through the tall windows. Clara stepped outside the main entrance to get a breath of fresh air before heading home. The morning air was cool. The sky above the hills was turning from black to soft gray. And that was when she saw her. A woman stood near the old olive tree beside the hospital gate. At first, Clara assumed she was a visitor waiting for someone. But something about the woman seemed unusual. She stood perfectly still, looking toward the hospital building. She wore a long white robe and a pale blue cloak that moved gently in the wind. Her posture was calm, peaceful. Clara walked toward her slowly. "Good morning," she said politely. The woman turned. Her face was kind and quiet, and when she looked at Clara it felt as though the entire morning had grown calmer. "Good morning," the woman replied. Her voice was soft but clear. "Are you waiting for someone?" Clara asked. The woman smiled gently. "Yes," she said. "I came because someone asked for help." Clara frowned slightly. In a hospital, many people asked for help. But there was something about the way the woman said it that felt different. Before Clara could ask another question, a sudden alarm sounded inside the hospital. A heart monitor. Clara turned quickly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I have to go." She rushed back through the entrance doors. Down the corridor, nurses were already running toward room 204. Inside the room, an elderly man named Antonio Morales was struggling to breathe. Doctors surrounded the bed, adjusting machines and checking his pulse. For several tense minutes the room filled with urgent movement and quiet commands. Then something strange happened. The man's breathing began to slow. His heart rhythm returned to normal. The monitor stabilized. The doctor stared at the screen. "That shouldn't have happened so quickly," he said quietly. Clara stepped back into the hallway, catching her breath. For a moment she remembered the woman outside. She returned to the hospital entrance. The olive tree stood alone in the early morning light. The woman was gone. No footsteps. No sound of a car leaving. Just the quiet road leading down the hill. Clara told herself the visitor had simply left. But over the next few days, something even stranger began to happen. Patients started telling the same story. A woman in white. A blue cloak. A gentle voice. And every patient who saw her said the same thing. "She came when I prayed." At first, the stories sounded like coincidence. Hospitals were places where people prayed more than anywhere else. Fear had a way of making people imagine comfort where none existed. That was what most of the doctors believed. But Clara wasn't so sure. 2 nights after she saw the woman outside the hospital gate, Clara was working another overnight shift in the oncology wing. Cancer patients rarely slept well. Pain, anxiety, and the quiet hum of machines kept many of them awake through the long hours of darkness. The hallway lights were dimmed. Monitors blinked softly inside patient rooms. It was 2:47 a.m. when the first call came. Room 312. A middle-aged woman named Elena Martinez had pressed the nurse call button. Clara entered the room quietly. "Are you all right?" she asked. Elena looked calm. Surprisingly calm. Her breathing was steady. The fear that usually filled her eyes during the night was gone. "Yes," Elena said softly. "I just wanted to tell someone something." Clara pulled a chair closer to the bed. "What happened?" Elena glanced toward the doorway as if someone had just stepped out. "There was a woman here," she said. Clara's heart skipped slightly. "What kind of woman?" Elena's voice was almost a whisper. "She wore white and a blue cloak." Clara felt a chill move through her. "What did she do?" Clara asked. Elena smiled faintly. She sat beside me and held my hand. Clara looked down at Elena's wrist. The foreline was still in place. Her fingers trembled slightly. What did she say? Clara asked. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, remembering. She told me not to be afraid, she said, and that suffering does not last forever. Clara tried to remain calm. Did she tell you her name? Elena shook her head slowly. No, but when she left, I felt something. What? Clara asked. Elena looked at the ceiling, her voice peaceful. Hope. Clara left the room a few minutes later. In the hallway, she checked the security monitor at the nurse's station. Camera feeds showed every corridor on the floor. No one had entered room 312. No one had left. The hallway outside Elena's room had remained empty the entire time. Clara stared at the screen. A strange uneasiness settled inside her. By the next morning, 3 more patients had reported the same visitor. A young boy in the pediatric ward, an elderly woman recovering from surgery, and a man waiting for test results. All of them described the same figure. White robe, blue cloak, calm voice, and each of them said the same thing. She came when I prayed. The hospital staff tried to explain it away. Stress, fatigue, hallucinations caused by medication. But Clara remembered the woman by the olive tree. She had seen her with her own eyes. 3 nights later, Clara was walking down the oncology hallway when something caught her attention. At the far end of the corridor, near the windows, someone was standing. A woman. The pale blue cloak moved softly as if stirred by a gentle breeze. Clara froze. The hallway lights flickered slightly above her. Slowly, she walked forward. The woman turned. For a moment their eyes met. And once again Clara felt the same quiet calm that had surrounded her at the hospital gate. You, Clara whispered. The woman smiled gently. Good evening, Clara. Clara felt her breath catch. How do you know my name? The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced toward the patient rooms along the corridor. Many people here are afraid, she said softly. They need comfort. Clara's heart pounded. Are you helping them? The woman nodded slightly. I am answering their prayers. Clara took another step forward. Who are you? For a moment the woman said nothing. The hospital hallway was completely silent. Then she spoke quietly. A mother. Clara suddenly remembered the statue in the hospital chapel. The white robe. The blue cloak. The same peaceful face. Her voice trembled. Are you? Before she could finish the question, a nurse called her name from down the hall. Clara, we need you in room 305. Clara turned for only a moment. When she looked back, the corridor was empty. The woman was gone. But Clara now understood something the rest of the hospital had not yet realized. The visitor walking through the quiet halls of Santa Esperanza Hospital was not a stranger. And soon, the entire hospital would discover the truth. By the end of the week, the stories could no longer be ignored. Doctors tried to remain rational. Hospitals depended on facts, test results, and diagnoses. There had to be explanations for everything. But something unusual was happening inside Santa Esperanza Hospital. Patients who had been overwhelmed with fear suddenly felt calm. Some who had been unable to sleep for days began resting peacefully. Others said their pain had eased during the night. And almost every one of them described the same visitor. A quiet woman in white. A pale blue cloak. A gentle voice that spoke softly beside their beds. Clara listened to each story carefully. The descriptions never changed. Some patients said the woman had held their hands. Others said she sat quietly beside them while they slept. A young boy named Mateo, only 9 years old, told Clara something that made her heart stop. She told me my mother would be okay, he said. Mateo's mother was in surgery that night. No one had told him the results yet. But an hour later the surgeon stepped into the waiting room and gave the family the news. The surgery had been successful. Mateo smiled when Clara returned to check on him. I told you, he said simply. Clara could no longer pretend the stories meant nothing. Late one evening, after finishing her shift, she walked slowly down to the hospital chapel. The chapel was small and quiet. A few candles burned near the altar. At the front of the room stood a statue of the Virgin Mary. White robe, blue cloak, hands opened gently in welcome. Clara sat in the back pew, staring at the statue. Her mind returned to the moment in the hallway when the woman had spoken her name. Good evening, Clara. How could a stranger know that? Clara had never been a particularly religious person. She believed in kindness, in helping people, in doing her job well. But she had never expected something like this. After several minutes, She whispered quietly into the stillness of the chapel. If you're really here, why? The candles flickered softly. The chapel door creaked open behind her. Clara turned slowly. A familiar figure stood near the entrance. The woman in white. The pale blue cloak falling softly around her shoulders. Clara felt her heart begin to race again. You came, Clara whispered. The woman walked slowly toward the altar. Her footsteps made almost no sound on the stone floor. I have always come when people call, she said gently. Clara stood from the pew. Are you the one they think you are? The woman looked toward the statue beside them. The carved face of Mary seemed almost identical to hers. I am only a servant of God's mercy, she said softly. Clara swallowed hard. But why here? She asked. There are hospitals everywhere. People suffering everywhere. The woman turned toward her. Because the prayers here were heard. Clara's voice trembled. Can you heal them? The woman's eyes were kind, but there was sadness in them too. I cannot remove every illness, she said, but I can bring comfort. She stepped closer. And sometimes, comfort is the beginning of healing. Just then an alarm sounded somewhere in the hospital. Loud. Urgent. The sound of a medical emergency. Clara instinctively turned toward the door. It's the ICU, she said. When she looked back, the woman was already gone. Clara rushed down the hallway toward the emergency ward. Doctors and nurses surrounded a bed in the intensive care unit. An elderly woman named Rosa Delgado had gone into cardiac arrest. Machines beeped rapidly. Doctors worked quickly. Seconds stretched into long, frightening moments. Then suddenly, the heart monitor stabilized. A steady rhythm returned. The room fell silent. One of the doctors shook his head slowly. I don't understand, he murmured. Clara stood in the doorway. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway behind her. For a moment, she thought she saw a pale blue cloak turning the corner. And in that instant, she understood something deeply. The visitor walking through Santa Esperanza Hospital was not there to perform grand miracles. She was there to bring something even greater. Hope. But the greatest miracle was still about to happen. Morning arrived quietly over the hills of San Miguel. The sun rose slowly, painting the hospital windows with warm golden light. Inside Santa Esperanza Hospital, the night shift was ending, and the day staff began arriving one by one. Doctors checked charts. Nurses prepared medication rounds. The hospital returned to its familiar rhythm. Yet something felt different. Word had spread through the building about what had happened during the night. Patients who had been restless were suddenly calm. Several who had struggled with pain said they had slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. And the story everyone whispered was the same. A woman had visited them. A woman dressed in white, with a pale blue cloak. Clara stood near the nurse's station, listening to the conversations. Some of the staff tried to laugh it off. Others shook their heads, unsure what to believe. But Clara knew what she had seen. And more importantly, she knew what she had felt. That same quiet calm. That same presence. Later that morning, Clara walked once more to the hospital chapel. Sunlight streamed through the tall stained glass windows, painting soft colors across the floor. The chapel was empty. At the front stood the statue of the Virgin Mary. White robe, blue cloak, gentle expression. Clara stepped closer. For a moment, she simply looked at the statue, remembering the woman she had spoken with only hours before. Then the chapel door opened quietly behind her. Clara turned. Several patients had entered the room. Antonio Morales, the elderly man who had nearly died in room 204. Elena Martinez from the oncology ward. And young Mateo, holding his mother's hand. They had all come silently, as if drawn there by the same feeling. Mateo looked toward the statue. His eyes widened. That's her, he said softly. The adults looked at him in surprise. The lady who came to my room, Mateo continued. That's her. Elena stared at the statue. Her voice trembled. I saw her too. Antonio slowly crossed himself. No one spoke for a long moment. The quiet chapel seemed filled with something peaceful and gentle. Clara felt tears forming in her eyes. She knelt slowly before the statue. For the first time in many years, she prayed. Thank you, she whispered. Behind her, the other patients knelt as well. Outside, the church bell in the town began to ring across the valley. Its sound echoed softly through the hills. Clara closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, she noticed something unusual. The sunlight streaming through the window had shifted. For just a brief moment, the light fell across the statue in such a way that it almost seemed alive. The blue cloak glowed softly. The face appeared warm and gentle. And Clara could have sworn she felt the same calm presence she had felt in the hospital hallway. But when she blinked, everything looked normal again. Just a statue. Just sunlight. Just a quiet chapel. Yet everyone in the room felt the same thing. The hospital had been visited. Not with thunder. Not with grand miracles that would make headlines around the world. But with something quieter. Something deeper. A mother answering the prayers of those who needed comfort the most. In the weeks that followed, Santa Esperanza Hospital returned to its normal routine. Doctors worked. Nurses cared for patients. Life continued. But the stories never stopped. Patients spoke about the night a woman walked through the hospital halls bringing peace. And sometimes, very late at night, nurses said they felt something unusual while walking the corridors. A quiet calm. A sense that someone kind was nearby, watching, listening. And in the small chapel near the entrance, the statue of the Virgin Mary remained exactly as it had always been. White robe, blue cloak, gentle eyes. Yet now, whenever Clara passed the chapel door, she paused for just a moment. Because she knew something the world might never fully understand. When people call for help with a sincere heart, a mother always hears. And sometimes, she comes.